Hi, Gabriela. That
Hello.
was a little bit difficult.
Yes, that was interesting, but we're here now, so all good.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll pretend like this was always the plan and
Yeah,
nobody needs to know otherwise, right?
perfect.
Amazing. Well, this is the second time that Gabriela and I have been face to face on Zoom. The first time was right at the start of when Gabriela commissioned me to do this audiobook, and we sat down and we talked through what was the audiobook, what was the novel like, and who are the characters, and what was her vision for the book. Um, Do you want to start, Gabriella, just by telling us who you are, why you are a writer, and kind of your journey from the beginning of when you ever started to write things up to this point?
Sure. So hello, my name is Gabriela Lavarello. And I have always loved stories. I grew up in a household where reading was, very encouraged, and my stepfather would always read us Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And so I always grew up in a very much of like a storytelling atmosphere. And my dad is also an author, so I just was always very exposed to it. And so I wrote my first little story when I was like 7 years old or something like that. It was
Amazing.
about a dragon, I think, named like Sting, I'm pretty sure. And so I always kind of wrote on and off little stories. And then when I was, oh boy, how old was I? Well, I can't remember how old I was when I wrote my very first novel, but I must have been like in eighth grade or something, like very young. And then I decided that I wanted to take it seriously. And so with that, I started writing of Liars and Thieves in 2017. And from there on, I just started doing a lot of research and was able to find a writing mentor who read of Liars and Thieves and thought that it could go somewhere. And so from then on out, I just took the path of deciding to turn it into hopefully a full-time career at some point. But for now, it is a passion and part-time career.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I've loved reading of Liars and Thieves, and more than reading it, obviously narrating it and therefore being really in the story and present with all the characters. It has been a real wild ride, and I'm really excited. And it is so nice for me as a narrator publicizing the book that I've narrated to not that you have to kind of like pull this out of yourself when you're not so enthusiastic about the book, but when you are so enthusiastic about what you've just done, it's so nice to be able to go, no, really, go and get this book. Don't just get it because you like me, get it because it's really good.
Thank you.
Um,
No, I'm so glad that you were the one who narrated it, and listening to the proof of everything, like what of the narration, I could tell that there was a lot of like true passion behind it too. And so that was, I also wanted to ask you what got you into narrating and what kind of led you down this path.
yeah. So not anything specifically to do with narrating until the last 4 years or so. So I've been part of amateur dramatic stuff since I was about 16. So musicals mainly, so on stage, singing and acting. For a long time, I've done lots and lots of things with amateur groups, all through my late teens and my 20s. Did lots at university, did lots since I graduated from university, and have always loved that. Have never kind of made any steps towards that becoming any sort of career. I went into teaching. I qualified as a teacher soon after I left uni, and I'm doing that now. So I'm a secondary school biology teacher by day. And then it was 4 years ago, so 2019. I was very much into watching a particular live stream of some voice actors who play Dungeons and Dragons,
Oh,
which is
cool.
another hobby of mine. So they're called Critical Role, and they're all voice actors that they know each other through that. And they had a little game of Dungeons and Dragons, and it ended up becoming so popular that they streamed it online. And getting to know them through that stream, or at least understanding what they did, I was like, oh, that would be an awesome thing to do, right? Like acting is great, and I love acting, but being able to play, I mean, there's loads of reasons, but I think the biggest reason of why I love it is that you don't just get one character that you play as you do in a musical or a play. You've got all of them, uh, and that's amazing. Like some of the most fun I've had in on the stage is playing odd characters, and not necessarily having the normal straight down the line male lead role model or whatever. It's the weird ones, the crooked ones, the kind of ones that you wouldn't expect or that require some like different acting choices, should we say. So deciding that I wanted to do that, went and saw a voice coach who kind of put me on the path of what you could do, commercial stuff and video games and audiobooks. And I was like, oh, okay, audiobooks sound fun. So I think I sent off lots of auditions for various things, but came back with a positive response from a couple of audiobooks that I auditioned for, accepted one of them, and that turned into a series of 4 books that I narrated each one of. So that started in 2019. I think the last of those was released would have been 2021, I think, which was also when my daughter was born, second child, which having a second child is a whole other world to having a first child. Having to do it at the same time, then kind of put pay for quite a decent amount of time to me really spending a decent time of a week sending auditions off or building stuff. And it's been in this last, I think I auditioned for your book back in February or March. I've been auditioning for stuff, but not successful in things. So getting this, then I was like, oh, yes. And it was fantasy. It was a fantasy story, which is what I'd always wanted to do in the mold of Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, because that's what I like to read, first of all. And the storylines are usually, if it's good, really sweeping and mystical and interesting. And the characters are always, either magical or from different parts of the world, which means different voices are required and all that kind of thing. So I've really, really loved it. And one day, much as you hope with your work, I hope that this becomes a regular enough thing that I can reduce, probably not quit, but reduce the day job down to a minimal place and be able to go, look, I'm earning lots from this.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, thank you for asking.
Yeah, of course. No, that's so cool. And yeah, I can't imagine also having 2 kids on top of all of that too. That's a lot to balance. I only have a dog, so I can't can't compare it.
Yeah, my parents have a dog, and I know they're pretty, hard work sometimes. They take up
They
your
are
time.
kind of like children. Yeah, they
Yeah,
they have their things.
yeah, I can imagine. What I'd like to do, and if you've got any questions for me, you can chuck them in as we go, is I've got some really great questions, I think, that I hope you maybe haven't seen from many of my pages that people have posted that I'd like to ask you, if that's all
Sure,
right.
absolutely.
So I'll start off with, you've answered a couple of them already, but why fantasy? So this is your debut novel, wasn't it? You
Yes,
had
yes.
like an anthology of short stories before this, and this
Mhm.
is your debut like novel. This is Gabriela. She's out there. Why fantasy? Would you like to write any other types of novel that comes from Sue?
Yes. So why fantasy is because much like you, I mainly read fantasy. And as through my formative years and even into adulthood, um, it was always the thing that I felt that I could connect to the most, and that I also really love the sweeping aspect of it and the adventure. And usually there's an aspect of found family and very profound elements within a fantasy book that I don't really find in other genres as much, in the way that really like speaks to me. And I also just love magic. Who doesn't love magic? So
Absolutely.
yeah, so I wanted to kind of create, because I love Lord of the Rings, I love Game of Thrones, the very like kind of classical fantasy. But in my head, I was like, well, what if I know a lot of now with like TikTok and everything, reading fantasy has become very popular. But when I first started writing of Liars and Thieves, in my mind, it was, well, how can I write a classical twist or a new twist on classical fantasy in a way that younger people can read, or that's just more accessible for many people to read. Um, while still like keeping that kind of old fantasy feeling to it. So that was what the inspiration was behind of Liars and Thieves. But as I've been writing the series, it's been taking a lot of really fun twists and turns. So I'm very excited about that. And I have a few books that I've already written that I will be publishing in the future that aren't fantasy. But it's really hard for me to write a book without any magic in it. So there's definitely fantastical elements to all of them.
That's amazing. And in terms of the magic, this is a question from me now. Do you start the book kind of knowing what level of magic, if you kind of get what I mean by that, there's going to be in the book? So like Game of Thrones, for example, the magic is very much like, is it magic? Is it a god? Is it something like that? Whereas Harry Potter is like, no, it's magic, and the magic is really obvious. Where do you start with that at the beginning of the book and at the conception of the book?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Usually for of Liars and Thieves, I wanted the magic to have a very like grounded feeling to it. So instead of it just being like, oh, it's like Harry Potter, so it's just very like there is a whimsical
Yeah.
aspect to it, but I wanted it to still be a very important part of the world, but not like I wanted it to be very seamless with the rest of the world. So instead of magic being like the focal point of the story, I wanted it to just be part of the universe that the characters were living in. So usually when I'm creating a new story that has magic in it, I kind of think about like how central to the plot itself is the magic. And then depending on that, it'll either be a lot of magic, very like showy, very fluffy, or it can be a little bit more subtle and subdued. So I have an adult gothic fantasy that's coming out at some point, and the magic is a lot more like only one of the characters can actually perform magic.
Mm.
So it just depends on like how much it is important to the plot, I would say.
That's fascinating. Thank you. I'll give you one more, and then if you've got one for me, I'll let you go. Two people asked this question. Who's your favorite character in the book and why? That comes from Fiona and from Naomi.
Okay. Um Oof. Okay, well, I think the most fun character to write is Lorian for sure, because he's just such a mischievous and funny character to write. So I think he's the most fun for me to write. But I think my favorite character um is, I would say, actually Tedric, because he has such a deep and very interesting character, and as he goes through the whole series he really changes a lot, and he goes through a lot of like internal battles and like transformations. So he's been really wonderful, and as I was listening to the book, that was like the first time I had experienced my book since I had
Mm.
published it. So re-listening to it, I was like, oh yeah, I love Tedric so much. So yeah, I would say Tedric.
Yeah, I agreed with that. With the arc of Tedric was one of my favorite. The
Yeah.
transformation that you see across the book was, yeah, really obvious, but really clear to see, and really lovely as well. Tedric being the kind of commander of the guard figure of the adventuring group for people that haven't read the book. Um, Great, yeah, thank you. That was really lovely.
Yeah, absolutely. So question for you. I did have a question I had two people ask from Instagram. So this is from Maya, and she's wondering if you have any tips for getting started with narrating.
I would say, well, so two things. So first of all, in terms of doing a book, the easiest way to get into it is websites that have things up for open audition. So you don't need to have an agent. I don't have an agent to do this. You know, they will post things online and you will go, oh, that book looks interesting. Read the blurb. That seems up my street, or I could do a good job. They give you a little excerpt of the text. You read it in your best reading way and submit it with a sort of little statement about yourself. And then the author or the rights holder, the publisher, whoever they are, reviews them all and asks, you might get it. So the easiest one to do that with is Amazon's Audible website. So it's called ACX, the letters ACX.com. Create an account on there and you can do whatever you like. Equipment wise, you don't need a huge amount. You can get away with a £30 condenser microphone. If you Google condenser microphones, get a cheap one. Some of those will plug straight into a USB port on your laptop. And then you just need free software like Audacity that you can edit out your mistakes. So if I stumble in a sentence, and I obviously don't want to include that, I'm going to stumble and then re-record that sentence and then edit out, delete the original one. And that's, bare bones of it. That's all you need. And then in terms of how to do narration, the thing I started doing right at the beginning when I didn't really have a clue what I was doing is just picking books up and just reading them to myself as if I was reading them to someone, and playing around with character voices. I think the book narrations that I've heard that I've enjoyed the most are the ones where different characters are really clearly distinct. And that doesn't need to mean that they've got wild accent differences, like they have to all be from different countries. It's not that. You just create the one's got a slightly higher pitch, but only slightly higher pitch, which is enough for the reader or the listener to sort of kind of clock, oh, that's a new character, but not so wildly different to go, well, this is a little bit silly. So just practice, pick up books, any books that you'd like to read. Yeah, thank you. Good question.
Yeah, and I have one more. And they were wondering, oh, I forgot, I could not find her name, but she's wondering, how did you find of Liars and Thieves? Like, how did we kind of find each other for? So I'll let you go first for that one.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear your side. So the website I mentioned, ACX, which is the one that Audible run to get titles onto their website. I have a big page where I've kind of set some filters of like, these are the kind of books I'd like to have, and then they filter down the books. Usually there's like a screen of about 60 books, and then I filter them by best selling. So you get the ones that have sold the best up the top, because if you're looking to earn any money in the audiobook game at the beginning, at least, you want to pick books that are good and that people are likely to buy. I've auditioned for some books that have been, on reflection, not good. And I've got so far in one of them as to accept the role of narrator for it, be sent through the real book, read it and gone, oh my goodness, I can't spend hours of my time doing this because I'm going to be like curling up in a ball and crying at the quality of this. So yeah, sort by best selling, and then see what you take the fancy of. Liars and Thieves was one of two in the kind of round of auditions that I sent off that I like the look of. The other one was this what felt like quite Harry Potter-esque wizarding witching school book. Auditioned for both at the same time. Of Liars and Thieves was my favorite of the two, so I was really glad when Gabriela came back and said, oh yeah, you'd be good. And I was like, oh, amazing. And yeah, from there, talked to Gabriela and we sort of thrashed out what the process would be and how long it would take me and all that kind of stuff, and agreed on that. And then once we were happy, I was free to get going.
Cool. Yeah.
What was it like? What was it like from your side? How did you choose how to kind of find a narrator?
Yeah. I was also really curious about that too. So thank you so much for that. I had kind of the similar process of signing up on ACX. My books, since ACX is through Amazon, it was really easy to kind of get them registered through there. And then I had to find like an excerpt from my book as like an audition script. And they recommended to provide like 2 different scenes and have them be very like different. And so that I think was the hardest part for me, because I was like, okay, well, it was my first time trying to figure that out. But I think that I had 2 really great scenes to choose from. And then I just published the audition, and then I had a surprising amount of auditions come in. I did not expect that at all. And there were some really, really excellent ones from like very seasoned narrators. Unfortunately, they were very expensive, so I couldn't afford them at the time. And so it was kind of like very experienced, and then people who you could tell they were like using the microphone from their laptop. Like I could hear them chewing and breathing. And so it was very funny to have like a very big mix of narrator experience. Yeah. And then I found Toby's audition, and it was perfect. I listened to it and I immediately got very excited, because the way that you were able to, separate the characters' voices and make them so distinct from one another while also narrating the story itself in such a wonderful way. I was like, this is perfect. And so then we chatted, and you told the story from there. So it was actually pretty easy to make the decision once I was able to find your audition. There was so many, so it was actually kind of hard to find yours.
Yeah, that's you told me that at the start, that you got a lot of auditions, and that made me feel nice. I was like, oh yeah, I was not just the only one to audition, so you had to feel, oh, I guess I'll have to go with him. Because that's always in the back of a narrator's mind, is like, was I the only one?
Oh, for sure.
Um,
And that was my worry. I was like, is anyone even going to audition? That was my biggest fear
yeah,
going in
yeah,
was maybe this won't even become an audiobook because no one's going to audition for it. But yeah, so I'm glad it worked out.
yeah. I mean, just the genre of it being fantasy immediately throws out a load of bones to people. It's like, yes, I'll do that. And then the fact that the audition script looked really good means that, you know, you've got a load of experienced people, which is the sign of a good book, I would imagine.
Yeah,
Um,
it's very flattering.
yeah, it's great. Um, let me take you a couple of more questions. Zoom will kick us off at some point, so I
Okay.
think I'll get a notification, and then we'll aim to wrap up when that kicks in, maybe. So another one from Sue about your process of writing this book and the next in the series as well. Um, do you have the whole plot in your head at the beginning, or does it change and evolve as you develop the characters?
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good question. And I would say that with this series in particular, it's been a mixture of both. So when I first came up with the idea for the first book, I had the whole plot for book one already in my mind. And then I knew kind of the overarching plot that I wanted to happen throughout what was going to be a trilogy. And now there's going to be four books as I
Yeah, I
have written
saw
the first draft of book three. And I was like, oh no, there can't
that.
be only three. So surprise.
Yeah.
But but yeah, so I think as I wrote book two, I realized how deep of a transformation all of these characters are going through. And as they evolve, as the stories evolve, or as the story evolves, and there's more secrets coming out, and I'm coming up with more ideas. And so I do have to kind of rein myself in a bit because, you know, it does have to be four books, but I
Exactly.
still know what's going to happen at the very end. And so for now,
Okay.
that's been kind of like my flashlight going through
Yeah, yeah.
book three. And then eventually book four is I know what the very end of the book is going to look like, but there's still some pieces that I'm finding in
Mm.
between that.
Yeah, that's interesting. The question of how do you get there? You know where you're going, but as you say, how many books does it take you to get there? And then
Right.
I can imagine having to be really strict with yourself and go, no, I can't put that arc in because that'll have to be 5 books.
Right. Exactly.
Amazing. I'll give you one more from Stephanie, which is what advice would you give to someone who would like to write a book for the first time?
First of all, I think you should absolutely go for it, no matter what anyone says. Storytelling is such a wonderful thing to do. Even if you have no desire to publish just for yourself, I think it's such a wonderful thing to do. But my advice is to just allow yourself to mess up, allow yourself to write something that is messy at first. And you can edit a full messy page, but you can't edit a blank page. So just don't hold yourself back, even if you're not sure if the idea is going to go anywhere. You can figure out if you want to plot or not plot, but there's really no set guidelines on how to write a book. So really just experiment and find what works best for you, and don't stop your ideas from going anywhere just because you're not sure if it's going to be good or not. So that would be my biggest advice.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Do you have any more questions for me?
I do. Okay, I asked that one. Oh, okay. Yes. So this one is from Doug. He's wondering, how do you remember what voice or accent to use for each character? Like, do you write them down and say,
With
oh, or
difficulty.
you just, it goes, does it just come naturally to you?
It comes relatively naturally with the main characters. They speak enough that you have enough practice doing their voice that if they're then absent for 3 chapters and they pop up again, it's quick enough to kind of go back in your head and sort of start speaking it and go, yeah, that's it. Or if you're like really struggling to catch the Scottish accent again that you did for Creep, for example, you just go back and listen to a bit that you did. But I don't tend to have to do that very often. The worst time is if you've got a character that you think is going to be relatively minor at the beginning. And so you've read through the first sort of chunk of the book and you're like, right, we've got this minor character. So I'll come up with not a throwaway voice, but a voice that I'm not having to be confident to be able to replicate. And then they pop back up like a guard or someone, like, for example, Tedric's 10 sort of fellow guards. I don't think on this occasion they popped back up later in the book, but there are about 3 of them that in one of the first chapters, they have a voice. They will have different voices, but I have a suspicion that I might hear them again in book 2 or book 3 if we end up doing this together again. And I'm going to have to go, right, what on earth did I do for them?
Right.
But that's nice. That's a challenge, which I enjoy. And voices is one of my favorite things to do. You know, reading stories to my children who are 5 and 2, they're the perfect ages to just be being silly, really, is how all my voices start. And you just stand in the booth and go, right, they are what? Gabriela's written that they've got a low tone to their voice. They're authoritative. Okay, so we'll start like this. And then you just start messing around and seeing where you end up. And then eventually, usually you're like, oh, yeah, that little tone that I found there, let's try and expand upon that. And then trying to just keep that steady. They get steadier and steadier as the book goes on.
That's awesome.
Mm.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like having kids too, so that you can just practice. And because I remember as a kid, when my stepdad would read The Hobbit to us, he would do a lot of crazy voices too. And I always loved that. So I'm glad you have good ears to practice with.
Yeah, very much so.
And then I had one more question, I think. Yes. How do you figure out scheduling between your day job and narrating? Like, how were you able to balance that out for yourself?
Yeah, a good question, an important question. Tuesday evenings in the last 3 or 4 years have been the time that I've gone, right, this evening is set aside to not do X or Y, but I'm going to record or edit, because that's my job as well, is not just the recording in my booth, but then going to the computer and editing, which takes much longer than the recording. Doing one of those things from like 7:30 till 10, so that I go to myself, right, I've got 2.5 hours at least a week, which is when I said to you at the beginning that I thought it would take me X number of months. That's how I was doing that calculation. I was like, right, I'll do at least 2.5 hours a week. If I'm doing that, then the book should take, I think the book ended up being pretty much dot on 11 hours long. As a narrator, you essentially multiply that by 6 to say that's how many hours it's going to take you to record, re-record, and edit. So what we're talking 66 hours divided over 3 hours a week by how many weeks, and sort of figure out by that. I ended up being much shorter than that, given that I spent other time in the week doing it. But yeah, it's difficult sometimes if you've got especially family life plus a job like mine where you take a lot of work home and you're doing stuff at the weekend. You kind of find a rhythm eventually that doesn't impact too much on home life as well as your work, and as well that you're not burning out through doing it as well. It can sometimes, especially if you've left all the editing to the end, which, to go back to the previous question of how do you get into audiobook narrating, don't do that. If you've got a book to edit, don't record the whole thing in one go and then try and sit down and edit the whole thing, because it is torturous. 2 chapters at a time at most is what I'd recommend, and then edit it, and then you can go back and have some more fun in the booth.
That sounds very smart.
Yeah, I did that on one of my previous books. I recorded basically the whole thing in several sessions, but every time I'd be doing some audiobook stuff, I'd record and then it'd be done, and then I sit down to edit, and boy, does it feel like a slog sometimes. But you find ways to make it faster. It's fine. But yeah, don't leave it till the end. That's my advice there. We'll wrap up in a few minutes, but I've just got a couple more questions for you. One question about the characters in the book, because there's lots of characters. There's 5 main ones, aren't there? We've got Tedric, Aidan, Crete, Lorien, and Fenriel. They're the band, the adventuring band that are pulled together from various origins. And then we've got a whole cast of supporting characters. To what extent, if any, are the characters in the book based on people that you know?
Yeah, so the 5 main characters, the companions, I actually, when I first created them, thought it would be interesting to kind of take little pieces of my own personality and put them into each character. And so they definitely are like a lot of different, very small pieces that I'm able to see in myself. But for all of the other characters, I actually kind of took them as a way to reflect on like my interpretation of other characters from other books. Obviously, not plagiarizing, but just taking like there's the old wizard in Agaris, and making my own twist of him in that as well as in the Red King. And then like the haughty kind of arrogant king, I put that in King Soren. So just kind of like stereotypical characters in other fantasy books. I was able to kind of like place those within characters within the entire book. And then with like Suzune is one of my favorites because I was like, okay, dragons are supposed to be really scary and like, dangerous. And I was like, I want to make that a little bit satirical and make him like this very like grumpy kind of like haughty, but also very like particular and like gentlemanly kind of creature.
That's how I thought of him.
Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of just like from different characters I notice. And then also I'm sure that there's some elements of people that I know, but I couldn't say a particular person for sure.
And you
So
wouldn't either, would you? If it
exactly.
was based on somebody. um, that's really interesting. That was a question from Naomi, by the way. This is a question from me, and this is just a personal point. From the supporting cast of characters, and not any of the main five, of the voices that I chose to do for them, because for most, well, not for most maybe, but for a lot of them, you don't give a huge amount away to a narrator in your description as to what they might sound like, which is great for me because it means with your say so, eventually I can be quite creative and go, okay, well, they're going to sound like this. Which character that's not of the main five surprised you the most that I'd gone that direction, but you were happy with the direction I'd gone?
Oh, for sure, Agaris. I had kind
Yeah.
of thought of him as a very like quiet, like soft spoken, kind of
Yeah.
like shy almost voice in my head. But then when you made him the way that he is, I was like, wait, that is so much better than I even pictured in my mind. His accent, the way he kind of his tenor, like everything is so awesome and perfect. So yeah, that was a really good surprise. And again, you have such a talent with the voices and the accents and everything that if we work together, I'll definitely just give you free reign with that. So
Well, don't give me too much free reign because sometimes I will go way overboard
too
and you'll
far.
have to rein me back
It's okay.
in. That's really interesting to hear. Thank you. Indulging me. And one more question, which is if you could be a character from a well-known fictional tale, who would you be and why? And that's from Nick.
Oh man, I have to look at my
And
bookshelf back here.
attached to that, if there was a make-believe world, a fictional world, what I'm looking for, you could live in, where would
Mm.
it be? So two
Ooh,
questions.
that's a very good question. Again, I'm looking back here at my bookshelf of all of my books. I mean, I think if I could live in a world, I would love to live in the world of Harry Potter. Obviously,
Mm.
I'm sure everyone, yeah, I would love to.
Post Voldemort, that's what people say, isn't it?
Post Voldemort, yeah,
Yeah.
or Middle Earth, just so I can experience it. I'd love to go to the Shire and just experience Middle Earth. And if I could be a character, hmm, honestly, I think if I could be Gandalf, I would love that. He's such a wonderful character and he's
Yeah.
a lovely old man, so I think it'd be pretty funny.
Who doesn't love a lovely old man? Anyway, that can
Exactly.
do firework magic.
Yeah, I mean, I've been told that I act like an old woman all the time, and I can't think of any old woman wizards, so
Sure,
Gandalf would be
sure.
my first guess.
Amazing. That's great. Well, thank you, Gabriela, for your time. It's been really, really lovely to chat to you, and really, really lovely, as I said at the beginning, to narrate your book. It's been a real pleasure and a joy. And if we are to work together for the rest of the series, which we're yet to properly discuss, I will, I'm sure, love those too.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for narrating this awesome. It was so wonderful to work with you, and you did such a wonderful job. And I'm really excited for everyone to be able to listen to it. And I think we have it says 3.5 minutes. So I actually wanted to ask you if you could be
Oh,
any
okay.
character in the book. What
Oh,
which
okay.
one would you choose?
Spin it back to me. It have to be Lord of the Rings, first of all. If again for the world place, just Middle Earth just stuns and astounds me I want to like lap up every single bit of literature that exists surrounding Middle Earth to flesh out my imagination of what it's like, you know. Again, probably post Sauron.
Yeah.
If we get to be specific, fourth
Sure.
age, that'd be great. Um, and then in terms of a character, I think I'd probably love to be a hobbit. You know, like not specifically a particular hobbit necessarily. Like I don't want to be Frodo because that's
Oh,
rough. um, but yeah, like a Sam or just a lovely hobbit who's living a lovely little peaceful existence, unaware of the world. It's just so quaint and lovely and as Tolkien would say, very English.
yes.
Countryside and nature and all those things. It's just
Wonderful.
it's a beautiful setting. So
Yes.
thank you.
No, I love that.
Um, we are at the behest of Audible in terms of when this audiobook gets published. We cannot give anyone a publication date, which is so frustrating. We will find out on the day that you find out when it gets published. We only know that they are currently looking it over and checking that it's okay to be published. But as soon as we find out, we will shout from the rooftops, and we hope that you will all go and buy a copy, or if you're on my list or Gabriela's list for free codes for providing us a review through Audible. You'll find this coming into your inboxes very soon after publication. And we thank you so much. Please do review it. It helps so much with pushing it to the top of people's search results on Audible, and those little annoying emails you get to your inbox to say, have you thought about this book? Reviews mean that we end up in there, which is how the book will start to snowball. And it really deserves to. Like, it really, really is brilliant. And I never even got to mention the twists. I'm not going to mention what the twists are, but boy, are they good. I sent Gabriela
Thank
a
you.
reaction of what I had live to reading it for the first time. And yeah, I was just like bowled over.
Yep, that
Say
was
no
my
more.
favorite thing.
I'll say no more. Go and read it. Read it. Buy the book and buy the audiobook. Listen to
Yes,
them and read them at the same time. Why not?
absolutely. Please do.
Indeed. Right, Gabriela, it was lovely to chat to you. And
You as well.
we shall do this again, I hope, at some point in the future.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you guys all for watching.
Yes. Bye
All
bye,
right.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.